In the 1600s, I believe this was a professor of the Catholic Church, had written a paper about the great error in the Qur'an, the great historical error in the Qur'an. And that refers to, you know, the Pharaoh and Moses. Well, Pharaoh in the Qur'an tells one of his ministers, whose name is Haman, okay, he tells him to build him a tower so he may reach the God of Moses and, you know, to discuss with him. Now, this occurs about 4 or 5 times in the Qur'an. Haman is mentioned a total of 6 times in the Qur'an. When Christian and Jewish scholarship came into contact with this passage, the criticism was, first of all, there's no Haman mentioned in the Bible in association with the Pharaoh. Second of all, he has been mentioned in the book of Esther under the king Xerxes in the story of the Tower of Babylon, the Tower of Babel, the famous story, and this is 1,000 years after Moses. So it's a completely different historical era where Haman, and that man Haman has been mentioned as building a tower. So the obvious alleged error was that Muhammad, ma'adallah, may have confused these stories that he was kind of getting from the Christians and Jews and kind of mixed them together and presented this. Maurice Bucquois, it's about 70 years ago that he engaged in this study. He said, well, Jewish history contradicts what the Qur'an is saying about Haman and this tower building. Let's look at Egyptology. Let's look at Egyptian history, because the French and the Germans at the late part of the 1800s had already started translating or getting into Egyptian hieroglyphics and reformulating the language to try to translate some of the ancient Egyptian texts. Egyptology was a big deal in the early 1900s even. So he travels to speak to some of these Egyptologists, says to them the Qur'an has this name, Haman, as a minister working for the historical Pharaoh at the time of Moses, that specific Pharaoh. The Egyptologists tell him, and this is actually articulated in his book, The Bible, Qur'an, and Science, that there's no way this man could have known that name, and it's not even going to be there because that language, the Egyptian hieroglyphic language, was already dead for a couple of thousand years. Nobody knew that language. After translation, he goes to Austria and finds out there's actually a list of people that worked in the court of Pharaoh. They find Haman as the chief architect. That's actually found in Egyptology, a name mentioned in the Qur'an.
One of the individuals referred to in the context of Pharaoh is Haman. He is mentioned in 6 different places in the Qur'an, in which we are informed that he was one of Pharaoh's closest allies. Surprisingly, the name Haman is never mentioned in those sections of the Old Testament pertaining to the life of Prophet Moses. This information in the Qur'an was backed up by archaeological discoveries made centuries later. Until the 18th century, the writings and inscriptions of ancient Egypt could not be understood. The ancient Egyptian writing system consisted of hieroglyphs, or stylized pictures rather than words, and was forgotten centuries ago. In 1799, the mystery of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs was solved by the discovery of a tablet called the Rosetta Stone, dating back to 196 BC. Through the decoding of hieroglyph, an important piece of knowledge was revealed. The name Haman was indeed mentioned in Egyptian inscriptions. The same inscription also indicated the close relationship between Haman and the pharaoh. In the dictionary of People in the New Kingdom, which was prepared based on the entire collection of inscriptions, Haman is said to be the head of stone quarry workers. The verse in the Qur'an describing the event where Pharaoh asked Haman to build a tower is in perfect agreement with this archaeological finding. Pharaoh said, "Counsel, I do not know of any other deity for you apart from me. Haman, kindle a fire for me over the clay, and build me a lofty tower, so that perhaps I may be able to climb up to Moses' deity. I consider him a blatant liar." The discovery of the name Haman on ancient Egyptian inscriptions once again revealed that the Qur'an was sent down from the sight of God. In a miraculous way, The Qur'an conveys to us historical information that could not have been possessed or understood at the time of the Prophet.
And I'm sure you all know the story of Noah, how God sent Noah to his people, and the people of Noah refused to believe in him. And because of that, God sent upon them a flood. And now before that flood, God told Noah to build an ark. Now, the Qur'an is mentioning a specific name of the mountain where the ark of Noah came to rest. And it's very interesting that recent archaeological research around the area of Mount Judy. In fact, there is a Mount Judy in Turkey, in present-day Turkey. And on this Mount Judy, there is a bolt-shaped object with exactly the same dimensions as the Ark of Noah. However, the Qur'an does not claim that the flood of Noah was a universal worldwide cataclysm. In fact, the Qur'an clearly refers to the punishment that is bestowed upon Noah and his people as being something that is specific to Noah and his people. And so although we don't have any geological evidence for a universal cataclysm, we do of course have plenty of geological evidence for local cataclysmic floods. So this is very interesting that the Qur'an first of all accurately points out that the ark came to rest on Mount Judy, and it seems that there is a very, very high probability that the bolt-shaped object, and surveys have been done of it, is the remnants of a massive bolt. The Bible describes a cataclysmic, universal, worldwide event, whereas the Qur'an describes it as a local event. Again, what we find here is that the Qur'an is in agreement with archaeological and scientific data. It's perfectly acceptable and it's viable and verifiable according to that.
At the beginning of the 1990s, a most important archaeological discovery was made. That discovery was of an ancient Arab city. What rendered this archaeological find particularly interesting was the fact that this city was where the Ad, mentioned in the Qur'an, lived. It was Nicholas Clapp, a noted documentary filmmaker and a lecturer on archaeology, who found this city mentioned in the Qur'an. Being an Arabophile and a winning documentary filmmaker, Clapp had come across a very interesting book during his research on Arabian history. The book referred to Ubar, a very ancient city, and to tracks belonging to it. In order to aid his work to find these tracks, Clapp requested assistance from NASA to provide the satellite images of the area. From this, he went on to study the ancient manuscripts and maps in the Huntington Library in California. Here he quickly found a map drawn by the Greek-Egyptian geographer Ptolemy in 200, which showed the location of an old city found in the region and the paths which actually led up to this city. Moreover, the trails in the map corresponded with the trails in the satellite pictures taken by NASA. The final destination of these trails was a broad site understood to have once been a city. Finally, the location of this legendary city was discovered. After a short while, excavations began, and remains of an old city were brought to light. It was these remains that constituted the real proof that this ancient city was the city of the people of Ad, referred to in the Qur'an. Because among the structures unearthed during the excavations were pillars. This is just as is revealed in the verses. Don't you see what your Lord did with Ad Iram of the columns, whose like was not created in any land?